I'm Libby Van Cleve, and I'm here with Ezra Laderman doing a pre-concert talk with you. I'm the Director of Oral History of American Music at Yale University. This is an archive of interviews with American composers. Ezra Laderman is one of the people who is represented in our collection, and he is also very, very deeply connected with Yale University, as you'll hear as we discuss things. So, good to have you here.
Happy to be with you.
Well, we thought we'd start with a little bit of a background about Ezra, and in a short time we'll get to some of the specifics about the guitar piece that he's written for Ben Verdery, which you guys will hear tonight. First of all, you're a local guy.
Well, almost. I'm a Brooklyn boy. That's almost local. Born and bred in Brooklyn. So then we made this extraordinary move to be close to Columbia University, and life has not been the same since. And it stayed that way until I retired, and at the age of 65, I got a call from a dear friend, Jacob Druckman, saying I've got to come to Yale. And at 65, I started my experience at Yale. And I'm fond to say that outside of meeting my wife, Aimee, Yale is the best thing that ever happened to me. So go shoot me.
That's pretty remarkable to start a new career at age 65.
Right. I had really, I was commuting back and forth between our home in New Jersey and a home that we have in Cape Cod, in Woods Hole, and composing lots of stuff for orchestra, for chamber music, getting performances all over the country. And then during the summer, Jacob Druckman called, and I'll tell you, what happened was that we had both received commissions from the Chicago Symphony for their centennial celebration, and he knew that I had finished my work, and we both knew that he hadn't finished his work. And so he impressed upon me the need to come to Yale for a semester so he had a chance to finish an oratorio that he was writing for the Chicago Symphony. And I didn't want any part of coming back to teaching. But he eventually got me to say yes, and I came to Yale, and it's been an absolutely extraordinary, wonderful experience since.
What has been particularly interesting and wonderful
I think
about
the most
Yale?
wonderful thing is the quality of the student that comes to Yale. I had not had that experience in my former years of teaching. The level was different. The faculty was different. The whole ambiance of what we did at the school was at a different level. So that's what changed.
When Ezra was at Yale, not only did he, of course, teach composition, but you were the dean for a while.
Yes, for many years I was dean, and then I gave that up and went to, well, the story continues. I went into the faculty to be with my friend Jacob Druckman, and then Jacob unfortunately developed a cancer that was incurable. He died and left me as the senior member of the composition program, which I did for a number of years until a colleague of mine who had been on a leave for a number of years came and took over that responsibility. But then I stayed on because I was having such a good time. And I'm still full-time at Yale, having a wonderful time.
Ezra not only was dean at Yale, but also worked as the head of the music program at the NEA before he was dean. And one of the things I just wanted to ask you about is how you could continue to be so productive musically while you had these gigantically demanding jobs.
Well, there are 24 hours in a day. And if I work 3-4 hours as a composer, that's a lot. That's not a little, that's a lot. And when I was much younger, I was able to work at one set of compositions in the morning, take a break, and then orchestrate or do work on a whole other body of work in the afternoon. So that doesn't happen today. I really work on one work until that work is done. And that's what I'm in the process of doing right now. In fact, let me share with you. What I'm doing now is I'm collaborating with the poet Robert Pinsky, and what he has done is he's carved a libretto out of his translation of Dante's Inferno, and we are doing 7 scenes from hell. It's unbelievably theatrical, and he's created a libretto that I have now gone through the vocal score of that libretto, and I'm proofreading that vocal score. So that's where I am right now, and that's the work that I'm writing. So I'm not writing 5 other works or 4 other works. That's what I'm concentrating on now, and will until I've gotten to a point where we're ready to rehearse the work. So that's where I'm at right now, compositionally.
Sounds like a very exciting work. Do you have a premiere date set?
There is. I mean, each scene is a complete work unto itself. And the scenes are taken from, obviously, the Dante's Inferno, but each scene is a reason why 1 or 2 people not only are going to remain in hell forever, but why they're going to remain in hell forever. And so the scenes are wonderfully theatrical, with a wide range of rationale for what happens. The last scene we've decided is from Paradiso, where they climb out of hell. They climb out of hell on the back of the devil, which is really great stuff.
But premiered? When
No. Who knows
when can we hear this piece?
I haven't got a clue when it'll be premiered. Oh, I don't work on commission. So I have a publisher, and what happens is that I work on the piece that I want to work. And when I'm finished with the work, I go to my publisher and I say, go find me a production. That's how it works. And I like it that way because that way there is no deadline. I don't have other people that I have to please. There's no director that I have to deal with. I have to please my librettist. And so far, we're on the same page.
Is that by any chance the way the work that we're going to hear tonight came about? That you just wrote it without having Ben Verdery in mind?
No. I had Ben Verdery very much in mind. The work that I wrote for Ben, and you should, well, I'll share a couple of things with you. I had never written for solo guitar before, so what you will hear tonight is the first major work that I've written for solo guitar. And so when Ben came to me, what he wanted initially was a 1-page work that was difficult but playable, that he would give to coming young graduate students who are applying to come to Yale to study with him, as a test of their ability to sight read and make sense of a new work. So that's the origin of this work. And what happened was that instead of these young people learning it, Ben learned it. And he got so excited about it, he said, you've got to do more with this. So out of that came a thorough, really hard look at what the guitar can do. And the work was not written quickly, but the work was written, in fact, carefully. It's in 4 movements, and the first movement begins aggressively with lots of spirit, full of brio. It pauses for a moment and then reinterprets what you had just heard and takes it a step further. It goes beyond what you had first heard. So it's almost like a da capo aria, but not quite. It goes back to the beginning but then goes beyond where the material had originally gone. If you will, the second movement is, for the most part, gentle, introspective, melodic, and requires the guitar to do sometimes two things simultaneously, which is a challenge, and he does it like a master. So that's great fun. The third movement is a little rambunctious. It's full of effects, and it's very, it's almost like you're at a party. It has that kind of feel to it. It has a spontaneity. It almost feels improvisatory. The last movement goes back to the material of the first movement. So indeed, the idea of the da capo aria is fulfilled. But now, when I get to the point where the material has been said, I take this movement to an area that it had never been before, and the work rides to a rather exciting conclusion. And I think the work takes around 15, 16 minutes. And I love watching this guy perform because he is one of the great performers of my life. I mean, it's a thrill to see what Ben does with this work that I've written.
Well, there's things I wanted to ask you about regarding Ben, and there's also things I want to ask you about regarding the piece. But since we're talking about the compositional structure of the piece, let's stick with that now. I had a chance to review a recording of a composition seminar that Ezra presented at Yale, where Ben played. And something that very much interested me is you were talking about how the opening phrases of each movement tended to generate the material for the rest of the movement. And if you could elaborate on that, I found it very, very interesting.
Every composer has his methods. And my method is that the stuff that begins the piece is the stuff that the piece is going to be made out of. So it's not that I begin with something and then something else happens and then something else happens. Well, I take it as a responsibility that what happens at the beginning, I've got to fulfill the destiny of that material in some way. So I take that material, and often it will be nebulous, it will be just 4 or 5 notes, but out of that material comes something that really makes sense. And this happened when this struck me that this was the way to compose when I was 3 years old.
3 years old?
And my mother, this was the middle of the Depression. This is 1927. For 25 cents, took me to the top of Carnegie Hall to hear Ernest Schelling with the Philharmonic play at the Young Children's Concert. And one of the first things, and the only thing I remember from that experience, is being up on the second balcony of Carnegie Hall, looking down and hearing the opening to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. That did it. Because out of those 4 notes, he writes the first movement of the Fifth Symphony. And that was the catapult for where my methodology of composing comes from. It comes clearly out of the classic tradition.
I thought about Beethoven and his developmental, like Laderman, Beethoven will take these little kernels of just fragments of melody and spin off a whole symphony with them, like in the Fifth Symphony. But at 3 years old, you were able to...
It's the only thing I remember. I don't remember anything else until maybe I'm 5 or 6, but I do remember being at the top balcony and seeing these microscopic musicians at Carnegie Hall with Ernest Schelling, a very tall, austere man, coming out on stage. And I remember clearly that they never did the whole piece. They did the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth. That I do remember.
It grabbed you.
Yes.
That's great. You mentioned, I think it was in the second movement, Ben doing two things at once. I mean, is this polyphony that you're discussing?
Right.
I was curious as to how you could do that on the guitar versus other instruments.
So when you listen to the second movement, be attuned to the fact that there's going to be counterpoint that this guy does, which means he has extraordinary control of the guitar. And he does it. And he does it with ease, which makes it fun. But you'll hear two very different ideas happening simultaneously, which is great fun to be able to pull off, and he does it. It's not that I did something great, it's that he does something great. I produced the challenge, and he really comes through.
Speaking of great and wild and crazy things that Ben does, you said something about the percussive aspects. And I must say, I know this piece, but I heard it again when I was preparing for this, and I thought, oh, this is wild, some of the stuff that he does. Tell us
So
how
I use all the whole guitar becomes part of the instrument that is expressing what I have to say. So in the third movement, a lot of the guitar outside of the strings becomes part of the ensemble. So we hear much more than just the stringing of the guitar. We hear the body of the guitar. We hear the neck of the guitar. We hear every part of the guitar. It becomes essential that the whole instrument becomes part of the musical expression of that movement.
So how did that come about?
I don't know, it was experimentation with the idea of that the movements, the interior movements would be very, very highly contrasted. And that the outside movement would not only be repetitive, but each time it would be repetitive, something new would be added to it. So that I shaped the work in that way.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about the title?
Well, we have a sailboat. I'm not a very good sailor, but we have a sailboat.
Let's make sure they might not have the title is on your...
On Vineyard Sound. Okay. And a lot of the summer, that boat is on Vineyard Sound. And over the years, I've had wonderful hours being on that boat. And that's where the title comes from. It's just part of my life that I love. It's been a great thing to get onto that boat, just sail off into Vineyard Sound, which is both a beautiful place to sail and also very treacherous. So it combines those two elements. For those of you who have gone through the whole, you would know that every weekend Coast Guard planes are forever picking up boats and taking them off the rocks. So there is a whole world that goes on Vineyard Sound, and this is a work that encapsulates that world.
So the guitar piece, would you consider the guitar piece also beautiful and treacherous to play?
There is, yes. I think there is that connection.
Yeah. Nice. So you really did a lot of collaboration with Ben. Could you tell us just about how the collaboration worked out and how that affected the overall, the final resulting piece?
The collaboration is that I wrote it and he interpreted it. And the two are not the same. So, somebody sits down and plays a Beethoven Pathetic Sonata. And then Arthur Schnabel sits down and plays the Beethoven Pathetic Sonata. It's a totally different experience. So I wrote the music and Ben Verdery interprets it. And he brings a whole other dimension to the music, which is wonderful. And and every time I hear it, he does it slightly different, which is also great. He never does it the same way twice. So I don't know what's going to happen tonight. So it'll be great. Because, he knows the piece inside. I think that over the past 2 or 3 years, he's now, I'm not sure how many times he's done it. He's certainly in the past month, I know he's done it at least 4 times. different places in the United States, so that it's something that he lives with, and so that the piece keeps changing with him. Because he's a restless interpreter, so he keeps doing things that have new nuances that are different than they were 6 months ago. So it becomes a slightly different experience. However, the notes are still the notes, and they're not changed. So that it's there. It's not going to be essentially different, but it becomes a living experience rather than a repetitive experience.
That's really interesting. I found there was some conversation of this nature at the composition seminar that I was able to listen to. And I'm also a musician, I'm an oboe player, and I found myself thinking about how, especially when you're taught as a kid, you're sort of taught a fairly rigid approach. This is what the composer wrote, these are the notes on the score. And of course, artist of Ben's abilities is much higher than the 12-year-old who's learning how to play an instrument. But I did think about how all players have to kind of decide how much ownership they're going to take of the piece, how much they're going to make it their own, and how much.
Well, if you talk to Ben, I think he'll tell you he owns the piece.
You mentioned it was the first piece that you wrote for the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
What are the challenges of writing for the guitar? I would presume that would be pretty foreign to most people who mostly have been writing for the orchestral instruments. It was a challenge.
I mean, for me to have written another work for, say, string quartet, I've written 12 string quartets. You can't get me to write another string quartet. I don't know. Who would show up and say, whatever? There's no way I can write another string quartet. So the challenge of writing something really new and different, that was very exciting for me, to come to a whole new environment in writing a work for guitar. That was a really wonderful new experience. And that doesn't happen too often. Somebody should come to me and write a work for solo harp, which I haven't done, which I would also love, but that hasn't happened yet.
How did you familiarize yourself with the instrument?
Oh, well, so you had to do a job. I'm not about to write a piece that is less than what I can do. So I took this as a very wonderful challenge and did what had to be done to write for the instrument. And I think when you hear the piece tonight, you'll say, gee, this is the first time he's written for this instrument? Mm-hmm. Okay. I haven't been a sluggard.
You said something in the composition seminar about Ben adding a certain theatricality to the piece?
Yes, he does. Well, he's look the way I'm dressed. I'm unbearably conservative. Well, you'll see how he's dressed. I mean, full of joie de vivre, right? That's what he brings to the piece. So he'll bring a whole other dimension to the work, which is wonderful.
What kind of theatricality, though? I mean, is it just within the notes? Or
you'll see. It's really, he does things. You'll see. I mean, unless he decides not to. That in itself, he may decide that in this austere world of the Kaufman Auditorium that it's inappropriate. So he may not do anything. But I doubt that. I'm sure that he will do his thing.
Be ready. You will be ready
right.
for that. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about your biography because we really didn't cover that so much.
Okay.
You talk about hearing Beethoven's Fifth at 3. You were quite the prodigy, it seems to me.
No. I wasn't a prodigy. In fact, they gave me up because they did something that they had no idea of what was going to happen, but they decided it was very important that wherever we lived, it was close to the Brooklyn Museum. But that meant it was always close to Ebbets Field. And that was the end, because I lived my childhood in Ebbets Field, not in the Brooklyn Museum. So that was a despair. So we had multiple problems in my house.
Gee, well, you managed to produce some very good music, and you have a lot of performances as a young person while you were in between Ebbets Field and...
Right. No, Ebbets Field took over.
But you went to the High School of Musical
Well, I
Arts?
went to the music, well, yes. So what happened was that when I was 12 years old, there was Fiorello LaGuardia had created the High School of Music and Art, which was next door to City College, up on 136th Street and Convent Avenue. And I applied, and I was accepted. And so I went to the High School of Music and Art for music, not art. And I remember, well, I'll give just one story. The very first day, the head of the music program there, a guy named Alexander Richter, took one look at me and gave me a double bass. And we lived way out in Brooklyn. So I took this double bass back to our home in Brooklyn at 1771 Union Street, and my mother saw me schlepping this big double bass, and the next day she came up with me to the High School of Music and Art, which took about an hour and a half on the IRT, and she walked up the hill, and I'm carrying this double bass, and we walk into Richter's office, and he takes one look at her, and he takes the double bass, he puts it aside, and he gives me a flute.
Oh, yeah, I knew it. Like a piccolo was what I was expecting. A little easier to carry.
It was hilarious. It was wonderful.
It's classic.
Nothing had to be said. And so for the next 4 years, I was a flutist. And what was interesting is that I always played second flute to Bess Meyerson, who was, as you know, Miss America, okay, and was the first flutist for the 4 years that I was always the second flutist. I was never a very good flutist because I never could really double tongue. And in order to really cut it as a flutist, you had to double tongue, and I never could really master that well.
Now you've found an even better way. You're a composer. All you need is a pencil.
Well,
That's
I turned to during all of this time, I was composing. Yes, I didn't know until maybe the middle of my years at Music and Art High School that what I was going to be was a composer. But certainly by the time I was in my junior year, I was convinced that this is the direction that I had to go.
Well, we thought that we might actually allow, if anybody has any questions, have a moment for the audience to ask some questions. We'll need to stop in a few minutes, but if anybody has any questions, it'll be hard to see, but if you could stand up and yes, the young man there, our friend.
When Bach wrote his lute suites, he actually built an instrument in order to be able to compose for the lute. He didn't really play the lute. So what did you do as a composer when you came to the guitar? Did you learn all the notes on the neck? Did you have a guitar next to you?
And they've asked that we repeat the question. So this gentleman's asked, how did Ezra familiarize himself with the guitar? Like Bach, did he actually either build an instrument or learn the guitar, or how did you do it?
I did a quick study. I studied the guitar. I studied it very, very seriously.
In what way? What did you study?
I looked at the instrument and the strings and very carefully figured out what was possible and what was impossible with those strings. I measured very carefully what you could do as far as chords, arpeggios, all of the things that needed to be accomplished before I put down a single note. In other words, I didn't treat it as if I was writing for a cello that was now going to be played on a guitar. I wrote for the instrument, as you will hear tonight.
Did you study other compositions written for the guitar?
No, I studied the guitar. I went to books on the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And I studied what was possible on the guitar, what worked on the guitar. And I'm sure that is much that I still have to learn. I don't for 1 minute think that I've now, mastered the instrument. But you will see when you hear the piece that this is not a work written by a bumbling idiot.
Actually, it's true though that Ezra's piece is not in any way, as far as I could tell, derivative of sort of guitar music. I mean, if you think about more the average pieces that you often hear at recitals, not Ben's recitals, but more average recitals. I mean, you've written an Ezra Laderman piece for the guitar. You have not written a guitar piece, So and that's a different, an interesting distinction that way. You had a question.
Oh, I was just going to ask, does this mean that you're going to continue to compose for the guitar?
So,
Will we see other pieces?
Will there be other pieces for the guitar?
What I would enjoy doing is a work for guitar and string orchestra. But that is not yet materialized. But that would please me very much.
Well, let's hope.
Okay.
Yes?
You indicated that when you were younger, you composed one piece in the morning and worked on a second piece in the afternoon, and now you tend to concentrate on one piece. Which do you find more pleasing to you?
And again, they've asked that we.
Well, I find being younger far more pleasing. But I cope with doing one work at a time. It's not that it's tough. It's always been a great pleasure. I've been blessed that I do something that I love. But when I was much younger, it was a piece of cake. Now it's work.
Anything else? Any other questions? Yes, Greg?
Do you have any favorite composers?
Oh my goodness. Where to begin? Well, let's begin with Bach. It begins with Bach and goes sideways and frontwards. But I'll give you, let's say, 6. Okay, we'll stop at 6. After Bach, I guess my early years, I grew up on Beethoven. And so we would name Beethoven second. I guess after Beethoven, I play a lot of Brahms at the piano. And I'll share one thing with you that I cannot get over. Brahms finished his 4th symphony, which was received with extraordinary acclaim, lived for 10 years, another 10 years, and never wrote another orchestral work. What a mystery that is. In other words, having come off writing such a masterpiece, he suddenly decided, I have nothing more to say. And now we know the history. He met a clarinetist, and at the tail end of his life, he wrote 3 magnificent works for clarinet and piano, and clarinet and string quartet. Okay? But other than that, but the fact that having written that 4th symphony with the Passacaglia 4th movement, which was absolutely one of the greatest movements ever written, and then finding he had nothing more to say as an orchestral composer, I could never understand. I mean, Sibelius was worse. Sibelius finished, his 7th symphony and then didn't write anything for 46 years. He just smoked big fat cigars. I mean, how do you do that? How do you say after writing? And what he did with the 7th symphony, he now, for the first time, wrote a symphony which had 4 movements and encapsulated it into one movement. And so this 7th symphony takes all of 21 minutes. An extraordinary work. And then he says, that's it. I don't have anything more to say. How do you do that? I can't understand those composers. I mean, I do. I love those composers, but I can't understand the tail end of their lives, how they gave up composing. Anyway, after Beethoven, I'm sure Mozart comes next. comes alongside Beethoven, not, they're side by side. Brahms is right in there, very, very clearly in there. Stravinsky certainly has had a tremendous impact upon my music. Schoenberg has, I would say, through Pierrot, but as he becomes infatuated with Stravinsky, he loses me. So that Schoenberg, up until the 30s, until the middle 30s, and where he's now living in California, that music has been of great importance to me. So those are the composers that have had most meaning for me over the years. Not so much Weber and not so much Berg, but Schoenberg, yes.
Well, I think that they're letting
Did
us
you
know
have
but maybe we'll take two more questions, and whichever one's.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to the piece that we're going to hear tonight. Just a quick question. The first movement, the signature is rhythmic drive and compulsion.
Yes.
I'm just wondering what you have in mind by compulsion.
Compulsion. That there is an energy, absolute energy that drives you on. You will sense it, I hope, but you will sense a driven musical idea.
It's a great note. I've never seen that before.
I haven't seen the program, so I don't know what they wrote. But that is how the piece starts off, right? It starts off. I mean, there's no two-measure introduction. It starts off with tremendous gusto, tremendous energy. We're out there. We're fighting the waves. We're in the midst of life. There are many different things that are going on.
Okay, one last question.
Last question. Okay, two more.
Two. Okay,
Two.
he says the man says two.
And then we'll leave. Okay.
And then we.
I was wondering if you have any favorite contemporary composers.
There are many favorite contemporary composers. I'll give you, I'll give you American favorite composers. Okay. Aaron Kernis, Martin Bresnik, David Lang, John Adams. They're all terrific composers.
And we should just have this one last question.
Have you ever written for the human instrument, the voice?
Have I written for the voice? That's all I'm doing these days is writing for the voice. Yes, I've written 7 operas. An opera was staged here many years ago, an opera called And David Wept, which is an opera that has been seen by millions of people because it was originally commissioned and premiered over CBS television. And it was done here, it was semi-staged, 20, 25 years ago, with a wonderful production directed by the choreographer Gene Erdman. So that is a work of mine that has existed and does exist. But I've written much for the voice, and in fact, that's all I'm doing these days is writing for the voice. And the collaboration with Robert Pinsky, I've now set 18 of his poems to music. They are 3 different song cycles, and they will be done at different places during the year. And I'm now writing this major work, this theater piece called Voices of Evil. And
with reference to evil voices, I think our evil voices are going to stop now.
Okay.
And we'll let them get ready for the recital.
Okay.
Thank you, Ezra, and thank you guys for being here.